Isaiah the prophet is one of the most important prophets of the Old Testament, as his book is quoted the most in the New Testament outside of Genesis and the Psalms. The book of Isaiah is placed in the prophetical section of the Old Testament and the Jewish Tanakh. Inside the New Testament, Isaiah is quoted in 20 of 27 books with nearly 500 references. Within the Gospels, there are many important cross-references, starting with John the Baptist being the one crying out from the wilderness from Isaiah 40 to Jesus' entry into Jerusalem before his crucifixion. With this, it is recognizable that a strong understanding of the book of Isaiah will lead to a better understanding of the New Testament. The biggest impact of Isaiah lies in the numerous prophecies that lie within the book. Prophecy makes up 25% of the Old Testament, and because of that, it is one of the strongest indicators of divine authorship, as only God could announce events in advance. Because of this, sections of Isaiah are often attacked as they were written in an anachronistic manner, meaning the book's prophecies were included after the events had taken place and the book was written only to appear prophetical. So let's first see the case for the historicity of Isaiah, followed by some of the most important prophecies in all the Bible that shows divine inspiration was involved. First, let's take a glance at Old Testament history. From Genesis 12 through Malachi can be seen in 4 periods. First, the patriarchs from Abraham to Moses. Second are the judges that follow Joshua's conquest. Third is the kingdom period from Saul to Jerusalem's destruction by King Nebuchadnezzar, and the final period with Gentile rule under the Babylonians and Persians. All periods have a direct connection with the reigning world power of its time. The Egyptians, followed by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, then the Greek Empire that falls in between the Old and New Testament time periods. Isaiah prophesied during the kingdom period, which lasted from 1050 BC with King Saul to Jerusalem's destruction in 586 BC by the Babylonians. Isaiah was a prophet to the southern kingdom of Judah from King Uzziah to Hezekiah. Of the 40 kings, only 9 were considered good kings, while the rest were primarily called evil. Major dates to know of the kingdom starts with its division in 931 following Solomon's rule, followed by the 722 captivity of northern Israel to the Assyrians, and also the 586 destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. This timeline allows us to see where the books of the Old Testament lie at. 1 Samuel covers King Saul's reign, 2 Samuel covers David's reign, and 1 Kings chapters 1 through 11 covers Solomon's reign, with the final chapters and 2 Kings covering the divided kingdom. 1 and 2 Chronicles primarily cover the same period with its extension through the 70 years of exile, with Israel's return beginning in the book of Ezra. The Assyrian and Babylonian empires parallel this time period, with the Persian Empire under Cyrus coming to power in about 539 BC. With this timeline in place, the prophets can now fill themselves into the timeline. The Assyrian Empire was at its strongest during Isaiah's time, with the most notable kings of TP3, Shalmaneser IV, Sargon II, and Sennacherib. Another important date is the Sennacherib's invasion in 701 BC. This famous account is brought up in 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and Isaiah chapters 36 and 37, where the angel of the Lord slays 185,000 Assyrians in a single night. With all that history as a backdrop, we can now move on to the pressing question: is if the book of Isaiah is historically reliable, and are the prophecies within truly of divine inspiration? Let's now look at 8 pieces of evidence that supports the reliability of Isaiah. Number 1, King Rezin of Aram. In both Isaiah 7 and 2 Kings 16 describes King Pekah of Israel forming an alliance with King Rezin to fight against King Ahaz of Judah. In Isaiah 7, God tells Isaiah to go to Ahaz to let him know that this alliance will not be successful and God will take care of Rezin. Ahaz, being a coward and not trusting Isaiah's words, went to King Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria and declared that he would be TP3's servant and give him all the treasure from the temple in return for defense against Pekah and Rezin. In 2 Kings 16:9, TP3 took Damascus and sentenced Rezin to death. Rezin is mentioned several times by reliefs of TP3, but what makes Isaiah chapter 7 so important is that inside the account is one of the most notable prophecies that the Messiah would be born of a virgin and called Emmanuel. Number 2, Sargon's conquest of Ashdod. Isaiah describes Sargon's conquest of Egypt and Ethiopia, but then later conquers Ashdod. The famous scene in chapter 20 is its description of how Isaiah walked naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign against Egypt and Ethiopia. Many might claim they'll do anything for the Lord, but I wonder how many would second guess doing this one. On one relief of Sargon recalls how he conquered Samaria and led away over 27,000 captives of Israel in Ashdod. For a period of time, critics held that there was no proof of Sargon outside of the Bible and declared the Bible in error. only later to find Sargon's palace and now consider him one of the most powerful Assyrian rulers to have reigned. Number 3. Tartan, the chief commander of Sargon. Also in Isaiah 20 describes how Sargon sent his chief commander Tartan up against Ashdod after fighting the Egyptians and the Ethiopians. A relief in the British Museum can see both Sargon and Tartan together. Mentioning Tartan indicates that Isaiah was an eyewitness to these events. Number 4. Shebna's tomb. In Isaiah 22 describes God's judgment on Shebna, who was the treasurer for the temple. Jewish historians say that he conspired with the Assyrians against Judah, which ultimately is why God pronounced judgment on him. In Isaiah 22:16, God describes Shebna's pride for carving out a grave for himself. His grave inscription was found by archaeologists in Siloam, which is now held in the British Museum, that reads, "This is the tomb of Shebna, the royal steward." Number 5. Pharaoh Taharqa of Egypt. Taharqa is mentioned in Isaiah 37, where King Sennacherib of Syria is marching towards Jerusalem while the Pharaoh is potentially coming to fight against him. This eventually leads to the angel of the Lord saving Judah by slaying 185,000 Assyrians in one night. Number 6. King Merodach-baladon of Babylon. After Hezekiah recovered from his sickness, Merodach-baladon came to visit him. Hezekiah showed him all the wealth in the palaces and the temple, to which Isaiah scolded him and prophesied that one day Babylon would come and take everything away. Number 7. King Hezekiah of Judah. Hezekiah is one of the most famous kings of Judah because of his numerous reforms, his building projects, most notably the Hezekiah Tunnel that brought water from the Gihon Spring into Jerusalem during sieges. You can still walk through this tunnel today. There are many pieces of evidence of Hezekiah's reign, of one of which is the Taylor Prism that describes Hezekiah's paying tribute to King Sennacherib of Assyria. Number 8. The seal of Isaiah the prophet. Found only 10 feet away from another seal found for Hezekiah. Seals were used by officials to authenticate documents with their impression on clay or wax. This is similar to when Pharaoh gave Joseph his royal signet, thus giving him all the power over Egypt. The tug-of-war fight over the seal deals with the unfinished side where the final letter in the word prophet is missing. Some try to interpret the seal as nothing more than of some local citizen of Nob, but from 2 Kings and the book of Isaiah, you read that Hezekiah and Isaiah were very close to one another. So the fact that this seal was found only 10 feet from a seal of Hezekiah, and that seals were only used by high-ranking officials, this gives good indication that Isaiah's seal was that of the prophet. Now, after laying the foundation, the book of Isaiah can be historically placed from around 740 to 680 BC. We can now analyze his prophecies to see if his book is divinely inspired by predicting events centuries in advance. There are 3 sets of prophecy that we will consider. First pertain to the Babylonian exile. The second set reveals details about the coming Messiah, and the final set reveals the plans for the nation of Israel. With Isaiah's placement on our timeline from 740 to 680 BC, we can now view fulfilled prophecies coming anytime after those dates. In Isaiah 39, 6-7, he tells King Hezekiah, "Behold, the days come, that as all is in thine house, and that which is thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall the Babylonians take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." From our timeline, we can see that in 586 that the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar. Thus this fulfilled prophecy was given over 100 years in advance. After the Babylonians had risen to the dominant power, King Cyrus of Persia conquered Babylon in about 539 BC. Isaiah, over 150 years earlier, predicted Cyrus's conquest. In Isaiah 44:28 through 45:6 says, "That saith to the deep, Be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers. That saith of Cyrus, He is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the 2-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee, and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness, and the hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which called thee by name, am the God of Israel. For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel mine elect, I have even called thee by thy name. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is none else. This prophecy causes the most controversy for Bible critics because it clearly points to a supernatural explanation of how Isaiah could have possibly named Cyrus over 150 years in advance. But of this, Bible critics will say that this was a later addition by Jewish scribes after Cyrus's conquest. Is there any legitimate reason for this? No, other than simply denying the possibility of a supernatural explanation. There are many Old Testament prophecies that give details about the coming Messiah, but Isaiah's are some of the most famous. In Isaiah 7:14 it says, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." This one stands out because of the nativity story that we hear about each Christmas. And yes, the word virgin here means a girl who hasn't had sexual intercourse and not merely a young woman. Another detail about the coming Messiah that Isaiah gives is his lineage. In Isaiah 11:1 says, "And therefore shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots." This means that the Messiah must be a descendant of Jesse, the father of King David. Jesus' genealogy is traced back to Jesse in both Matthew and Luke's account. Why this is important is because all records of lineage were kept at the temple. So this detail was verifiable until the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans under Titus in 70 AD. So if there was going to be any discrediting of Jesus or anyone claiming to be the Messiah, this could have been done with the official records showing that he wasn't a descendant of David. Another important prophecy about the coming Messiah found in Isaiah is that of his death. This prophecy, also known as the suffering servant, is found in Isaiah 52:13 through 53:12 that says, "See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and greatly exalted. Just as many were appalled at you, his appearance was so disfigured that he did not look like a man, and his form did not resemble a human being. He was despised and rejected by men, a man suffering who knew what sickness was, yet he himself bore our sickness, and he carried our pains. But he was pierced because of our transgressions, crushed because of our iniquities, punished for our peace was on him, and we are healed by his wounds. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, and like a sheep silent before his shearers, he did not open his mouth. They made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man at his death, although he had not done no violence, and had not spoken deceitfully. My righteous servant will justify many, and he will carry their iniquities. Therefore I will give him the many as a portion, and he will receive the mighty as a spoil, because he submitted himself to death, and was counted among the rebels. Yet he bore the sin of many, and interceded for the rebels." Just merely hearing these words, one can acknowledge that only Jesus' crucifixion is described here by Isaiah over 700 years in advance. The final set of prophecies are for Israel's future. The first prophecy of these is found in Isaiah 11:11 through 12 that says, "And it shall come to pass in that day, that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." The first regathering followed after Cyrus's decree following the conquering of Babylon. This second regathering started to take place in the early 20th century, especially following World War I and World War II. The most astonishing prophecy for national Israel is in Isaiah 66:7 through 8 that reads, "Before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. Who had heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children." This prophecy was fulfilled on May 14, 1948, after the United Nations voted to create the nation of Israel. So regardless of how critics would like to claim the earlier prophecies could have been additions only to be portrayed as prophecies, this prophecy invalidates that notion because nobody could have predicted how present-day Israel would to be formed over 2,000 years ago. As we have seen with our three sets of prophecies in relation to Isaiah's life, we can see their future fulfillment that only points to that the author was divinely inspired to give such accurate predictions. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button below to stay up to date with the new videos as they come out.